"Your cabin crew, stay out of cockpit business," a passenger snapped as turbulence rocked the plane. Others laughed. "Serve drinks, leave flying to the men." The brown-haired flight attendant said nothing. She quietly checked a child's seatbelt in the middle row. 3 minutes later, silence from the cockpit. The aircraft drifted slightly, all radio communication dead. She used emergency codes to enter the cockpit and took the controls. 20 minutes later, 2 F-22 fighters appeared alongside them. A pilot's voice broke through static. "Valkyrie 9, is that really you?" Every passenger froze. Meet Elena Keller. 31 years old, Austrian-Swiss heritage with brown hair tied low, gray-blue eyes, and natural beauty in an understated way. Small-framed but strong-shouldered, she wore the uniform of senior cabin crew for Alpine on Flight OS 217. Oslo to Boston aboard an A321LR. To every passenger boarding that aircraft, Elena was just another flight attendant. Someone to serve drinks, demonstrate safety procedures, and follow orders without question. At gate B-23, a passenger in an expensive suit spoke loudly. "These flight attendants just talk for show. Technical matters should be left to men who understand them." During boarding, when Elena reminded a group to stow laptops for takeoff, the group leader laughed. "Okay, Captain Elena." In the galley, a young first officer mentioned to the captain, "She tends to interfere with our checklists." The captain chuckled. "Let them play pilot if it makes them feel less scared." Elena never argued back. She observed, her eyes cataloging every detail, every technical anomaly that others assumed was beyond her understanding. What they failed to recognize were professional habits, marking her as someone with extraordinary experience hidden beneath routine cabin service duties. Elena always walked along cabin walls to avoid blocking evacuation pathways. She marked trolley positions with paper tape to locate emergency equipment instantly, even in darkness. Before pushback, she would read the wind through condensation patterns on windows, noting west-northwest winds at 15, 18 knots, jet stream at FL 330 that would create cloud shear. Mental notes she kept to herself. Colleagues found these habits obsessive. One passenger told his companion, "If there's an emergency, all she'd do is scream." A dead-heading captain chuckled. Flight attendants who think they're pilots become trouble. Elena didn't defend herself. She simply checked her flashlight battery for the third time. But there were moments that revealed her true character. 10 minutes before boarding, she noticed a 5-year-old boy trembling at engine noise. She folded a safety card into a paper airplane and taught him to breathe slower than fear. When an 86-year-old woman struggled with her seat assignment, Elena quietly switched passengers to place her closer to the lavatory. These small acts showed someone who understood that taking care of people meant anticipating their needs before they became problems. 3 items revealed Elena's true background, though she kept them hidden from passengers and crew who saw her only as service staff. First, in her vest pocket, she carried a silver coin hand-engraved with "Hold Fast, Back Alive." Not a good luck charm from flight training, but a reminder from making life-and-death decisions where one mistake meant colleagues didn't come home. Second, around her left wrist, she wore a red paracord bracelet with 3 knots tied in specific sequence, meaning see, compare, decide, in military aviation terminology, representing rapid decision-making process separating trained combat pilots from civilian aviators. Third, hidden inside her safety manual was a faded patch showing wings with Valkyrie barely visible, not belonging to any commercial airline. To someone understanding military aviation, it was the call sign of a pilot who had flown missions requiring skills beyond civilian training. Tonight's flight felt different from routine operations. Weather reports showed complex patterns developing over the North Atlantic, the kind of conditions where standard procedures might not be sufficient and where experience beyond normal commercial aviation could become the difference between routine arrival and emergency situation. Elena carried a silver coin engraved "Hold Fast, back alive, from making life-and-death decisions where mistakes meant colleagues didn't return home. On her left wrist, red paracord with 3 knots meant see, compare, decide in military aviation terminology. Hidden in her manual, a faded Valkyrie patch from missions requiring skills beyond civilian training. Few people knew that 3 years earlier, Elena had been a tactical fighter pilot in a NATO squadron, call sign Valkyrie 9. During one dark night operation, she had guided a lost civilian aircraft out of severe weather using guard frequency 121.5, but the mission remained classified. After losing a squadron mate in combat, she had left military aviation and requested transfer to civilian service, wanting to hear people breathing instead of radar warnings. 1 hour after takeoff, a thin electrical smell drifted through the cabin. Elena looked up to see the forward exit lights flickering irregularly. She contacted the flight deck. Flight deck, forward panel showing intermittent illumination. The first officer responded, noted, probably inverter vibration, not a concern. Elena marked the location with paper tape and mentally noted the position of the nearest halon fire extinguisher. 3 hours into the flight, the aircraft encountered clear air turbulence around FL 340. During her check of the lavatory smoke detectors, Elena noticed the test lights flashing off rhythm, a sign of potential electrical system irregularities. She contacted the flight deck again. The captain, sounding tired, replied, "We're in polar link communication. Radio interference. We'll address it later." That's when everything changed. The cabin pitched gently. ACA's warning lights flashed amber in the cockpit. The interphone went silent. The cockpit door didn't respond to calls. Elena pressed the emergency code to open the door. The lock system didn't respond. Immediately, she switched to emergency protocol, tapping the secret code on the door, 313 pattern. A weak knock came from inside, then silence. Elena made the critical decision. She instructed the second flight attendant to secure the cabin, have passengers sit low and fasten seatbelts and stop all service. She retrieved smoke hood, flashlight, and override key. Using the override code, the door opened. Electrical smoke streamed out. The captain was slumped over the left seat, the first officer breathing rapidly with his oxygen mask displaced. Elena immediately fitted the first officer with a proper oxygen mask, adjusted the captain's position, and activated her own 100% oxygen supply. She scanned the instrument panel. Autopilot still engaged. Altitude 340, heading drifted 10 degrees, communications showing interference. Master caution lights were illuminated. An electrical bus had likely failed, creating smoke from auxiliary panels. Elena performed 5 critical actions without hesitation. 1. Secured oxygen masks for both pilots using medical tape. 2. Pulled circuit breakers according to smoke fumes checklist. Only auxiliary buses, not touching main systems. 3. Armed emergency descent on the standby panel but didn't activate since cabin pressure remained stable. 4. Switched communications to guard frequency 121.5 and set transponder to 7700 emergency code 5. Rocked the wings gently 5 degrees, the international signal for not hijacked, in case interceptor aircraft were monitoring outside the cockpit. Passengers in row 19 were still muttering, "That flight attendant thinks she's a pilot." Elena didn't hear them. She touched the silver coin in her pocket. Hold fast, back alive. 20 minutes later, something extraordinary happened. 2 bright spots appeared at 2 o'clock and 8 o'clock positions outside the aircraft windows. F-22 Raptors on long-range fuel tanks for North Atlantic Patrol. The right aircraft rocked its wings, signal confirming visual contact. Elena rocked wings in response, acknowledged. Then came the radio call that changed everything. Alpinair 217, Valkyrie 9, is that you? The first officer turned sharply toward Elena, his eyes showing recognition and disbelief. Elena took a deep breath. Valkyrie 9 transmitting. Captain incapacitated. First officer recovering. Need vectors to nearest long runway and medical response. Fuel status good, smoke source isolated. A half beat of silence then. Copy, Valkyrie 9. Raptor 2-1 taking lead. The F-22 pilot recognized the voice. Still the same breathing pattern, the same number pronunciation of a wing leader from years past. In his helmet, a memory flashed. That night when Valkyrie 9 had maintained a lifeline for a lost aircraft. Turn right heading 290. Descend to flight level 260. We'll escort you home. Runway 14 at Archer Field has 10,000 feet. ILS approach available. Elena, right 290 down 260. Request raw data vectors, no autopilot. First officer has limited capacity. Cleared for manual flight. We'll guide you to the localizer. Follow our lights. In the cabin, Elena made a brief PA announcement, her voice calm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Elena from the flight deck. We have a technical situation, but the aircraft is safe. I need everyone seated with seatbelts fastened and remain quiet. Please let me concentrate on reading the wind. The elderly woman in row 7 took the small boy's hand. Listen to her. The group in row 19 bowed their heads in silence. Elena disengaged the autopilot and took manual control. Outside was darkness, below was ocean. Raptor 21, localizer signal active. Glide slope coming up. Elena deployed flaps 1, 2, 3 in rhythm with her heartbeat, maintaining approach speed plus 10 knots for wind shear compensation. The recovering first officer, now alert, managed throttles at her direction. Right hand on the levers, follow my call-outs. Elena read wind patterns through the subtle sounds of airframe vibration, adjusting heading 1 degree left to compensate for crosswind drift. The landing was textbook. Poppy lights transitioned from 2 white, 2 red to 3 red, slightly low. Elena adjusted power gently, raising the nose slightly. Touchdown was smooth. Reverse thrust deployed appropriately. Auto brakes on medium setting. The aircraft rolled straight and stopped at taxiway E. Over the radio, a held breath released followed by quiet laughter. Welcome home, Valkyrie 9. 200 souls breathed again. Inside Elena's safety manual was a handwritten note. IMC, raw data, trust wind. On the cockpit panel edge, the first officer noticed worn fingernail marks from years of gripping HOTA's controls during combat missions. The successful emergency landing at Archer Field represented more than skilled flying. It was the convergence of Elena's hidden past with her present role as cabin crew, witnessed by 200 passengers who had no idea they were being saved by someone whose aviation expertise exceeded most commercial pilots. When the aircraft came to a complete stop, Elena didn't immediately open the cabin doors. She looked at the first officer. "Are you stable?" He nodded. Stable and grateful. Elena systematically shut down auxiliary electrical buses, closed fuel cutoff valves, started the APU generator, and activated recirculation fans at low speed to clear remaining smoke from the cabin. The transformation in passenger behavior was immediate. The loud businessman who had dismissed flight attendants as just for show sat quietly, understanding that he had been saved by someone he had mocked. The group that had laughed at Captain Elena remained silent, processing what they had witnessed. When the cabin doors finally opened, the chief surgeon from the airport hospital stopped in amazement. "You're a pilot?" Elena shook her head. "Just cabin crew. But I used to be Valkyrie 9. The F-22 pilot who had guided her approach walked into the terminal, removed his helmet, and saluted Elena as he would salute a commanding officer. "Ma'am, we've been waiting to say this again. Thank you." Elena's military background was more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. She had been Valkyrie 9 in a tactical fighter squadron operating in classified missions where split-second decisions determined whether operations succeeded or failed catastrophically. The incident that had ended her military career involved a night mission where weather conditions deteriorated beyond all forecasts. Elena had been leading a formation when her wingman encountered mechanical failure during severe turbulence. While attempting to guide her squadron mate to safety, enemy radar had locked onto their position. Elena had made the decision to break formation protocol and provide radar cover for her wingman's emergency landing. knowing it would expose her to ground fire. Her wingman had survived, but Elena's aircraft had taken damage that required her to eject over hostile territory. She had spent 18 hours evading capture before rescue teams could extract her. During debriefing, Elena learned that her wingman had died from injuries sustained during the emergency landing. Not from enemy action, but from complications she felt she could have prevented with different tactical decisions. That loss had convinced Elena to leave combat aviation and transition to civilian service, where her skills could protect people without requiring her to engage in combat operations that might result in more deaths of colleagues. "I came to commercial aviation to hear people breathing," she told the assembled airport personnel, her voice carrying weight of experiences they were only beginning to understand, "to help passengers reach their families instead of preventing enemies from reaching theirs." The first officer, now fully recovered, looked at Elena with new respect. "You recognized the electrical failure pattern before our monitoring systems detected the problem." "Military aviation teaches redundant system analysis," Elena explained. "In combat situations, you learn to identify failures through subtle indicators because electronic warning systems can be compromised or destroyed." The airport fire chief asked, "How did you know to execute that approach profile?" "That was precision flying beyond normal commercial training." "Raw data flying," Elena replied simply. "When instruments fail or provide conflicting information, you trust fundamental flight principles and environmental inputs. Wind patterns, aircraft response, visual references, everything else is electronic assistance." The passenger in the expensive suit approached Elena with obvious embarrassment. "I said terrible things about flight attendants not understanding technical matters. My son was in seat 22A. Thank you for bringing him home." Elena nodded graciously. "Technical knowledge is only valuable when it serves people who need help. Your son was safe because everyone on this aircraft did their job properly." But it was the F-22 pilot's recognition that provided the most powerful validation. He had been part of the rescue operation that had extracted Elena after her ejection years earlier, and he remembered her call sign from joint exercises where her tactical flying had impressed experienced military aviators. Valkyrie 9 was legendary for precision navigation in impossible weather, he told airport officials. She could read atmospheric conditions that would challenge most pilots with instruments, and she could fly manual approaches that software couldn't calculate. Elena deflected praise with characteristic professionalism. Good flying requires observation, preparation, and trusting your training when electronics fail. Everything else is just managing fear. The airline's chief pilot, who had flown to Archer Field to investigate, made an offer that reflected how completely Elena's capabilities had been misjudged. "We'd like to fast-track you through our pilot training program. With your background, you could be flying as captain within 18 months." Elena considered the offer carefully before declining. "I chose cabin service intentionally. Sometimes the most important contribution happens when you work where passengers need you most, not where recognition is highest." Word of the successful emergency management spread throughout the aviation industry within hours. By morning, the story had become legend. The flight attendant who had saved 200 lives using fighter pilot skills that most people never suspected she possessed. Elena handled media attention by redirecting focus to the passengers. They trusted the crew to get them home safely. That trust is what matters, not who happened to be qualified to fulfill it. The passenger manifest for OS 217 included a note that would become part of aviation history. Emergency landing executed successfully through coordinated crew response. Special recognition to senior cabin crew Elena Keller, whose aviation expertise ensured passenger safety when standard procedures were insufficient. But for Elena, the most meaningful recognition came from a small handwritten card left by the 5-year-old boy she had helped before takeoff. "Thank you for teaching me to breathe slower than scared. CTA, type I.O. If you've ever underestimated someone standing behind you, only to realize they held the lifeline for everyone. Type I.O. If you've ever underestimated someone standing behind you, only to realize they held the lifeline for everyone. Asterisk, asterisk. No press conferences were held. No banners were displayed. Elena refused media interviews, saying simply, "The passengers are the real story." The next morning, she reported for Flight OS 302, Boston to Reykjavik, still wearing her cabin crew uniform, still serving coffee with hands that trembled slightly less than before. Something fundamental had changed in the aviation community's understanding of who possessed critical skills and where those skills might be found. A handwritten note appeared on the crew briefing room bulletin board, unsigned but clearly from someone who understood aviation. Sky 10, 10 silent breaths before speaking during emergencies. Seatbelts equal lifelines. Secure passengers before explanations. Check smoke, check source, check souls. Trust raw data over pride when automation fails. Back alive. The young first officer copied the note into his logbook. Flight attendants throughout the airline began asking Elena for advice. A new crew member asked nervously, "How do you stay calm when radio communications fail?" Elena smiled while preparing the galley. "There's no magic technique. You just count wind patterns until your heartbeat slows below fear level." The businessman from seat 12A sent an email apology. "I misjudged cabin crew capabilities. My son was in 22A. Thank you for bringing him home to his family." Changes appeared throughout the airline's culture. Pilots began including senior cabin crew in pre-flight briefings about weather conditions and potential emergency procedures. The artificial separation between cockpit decisions and cabin observations began dissolving as aviation professionals realized that expertise could exist at any position in the aircraft. Above the crew entrance door, someone carved small letters, "Respect the ones who fly from the back." The inscription was subtle enough that only people who touched the door frame during entry would notice it. Exactly the way Elena approached her work. Right place, right time. Small enough to avoid creating noise. Elena never confirmed details about her military aviation background. When directly asked about fighter pilot experience, she would simply say, "I learned precision flying in European military programs. Everything else is passenger service." But colleagues noticed changes in how she approached her duties. During pre-flight safety checks, her movements had the efficiency of someone who had performed similar checks in conditions where missing a detail could mean not returning home. Her weather assessments became something other crew members began consulting, understanding that her ability to read atmospheric conditions exceeded standard commercial training. The silver coin stayed in her pocket. The red paracord bracelet remained on her wrist. The faded Valkyrie patch continued hiding in her safety manual, but these items now represented something different, not secrets requiring concealment, but reminders that service could take many forms and that protecting people was the highest purpose, regardless of the setting. Late at night, when the aircraft was quiet except for engines and air circulation, Elena sometimes received brief messages from former squadron mates. Updates from current operations, success stories from military aviation, acknowledgments that her transition to civilian service had been respected and understood. She never responded with details about commercial flying, but she always felt connected to the community of aviators who understood that some skills transcended the boundaries between military and civilian aviation, and that the most important missions were often the ones that brought people safely home to their families. Alpinair had become more than an employer for Elena. It had become a place where aviation expertise was recognized regardless of job title, where passenger safety mattered more than professional hierarchy, and where those who served quietly could find respect for skills that might otherwise remain hidden. The 5-year-old boy from Flight OS 217 sent Elena a drawing of an airplane with "Thank you" written in crayon across the wings. She kept it in her flight bag, next to navigation charts and emergency procedures, a reminder that the most important flying was always about bringing people home. CTA type, "I will live kindly," If you believe silent protectors deserve respect, share this story. The story of Elena Keller teaches us that extraordinary capability often wears ordinary uniforms and performs routine tasks, while carrying knowledge that could save lives in situations where standard procedures prove insufficient. Elena had been dismissed as cabin crew who should stick to serving drinks. But she was Valkyrie 9, a combat pilot who had flown missions requiring skills that most commercial aviators would never develop. Her transition from military to civilian aviation wasn't about hiding her abilities. It was about finding ways to protect people without the trauma of combat operations. The lesson extends beyond aviation. It's about recognizing that the people institutions overlook might possess exactly the expertise those institutions need during crises. The quiet ones who prepare for situations others consider impossible. The careful ones who notice warning signs that electronic systems miss. The experienced ones who remain calm when standard procedures fail. True aviation professionals don't measure success by flying the most advanced aircraft or holding the highest ranks. They measure it by bringing people home safely, whether those people are passengers on commercial flights or fellow pilots in combat situations. They've learned that the most important skills often involve reading conditions that instruments can't detect and making decisions that protocols can't anticipate. Elena's transformation from dismissed flight attendant to recognized aviation expert wasn't about changing her capabilities. It was about circumstances finally revealing what had always been present. Her fighter pilot knowledge hadn't suddenly appeared. It had been evident in every weather assessment, every emergency preparation, every moment she chose competence over convenience. The silver coin reading "Hold fast, back alive" represented more than military service. It embodied an aviation philosophy that prioritized passenger safety above professional comfort, continued vigilance above routine compliance, and human judgment above electronic automation. The red paracord bracelet with its see, compare, decide sequence offered a framework for handling any aviation emergency. Observe conditions carefully before acting. Compare current options against available alternatives. Make decisions based on passenger welfare rather than adherence to standard procedures or professional hierarchy. The hidden Valkyrie patch symbolized something crucial about expertise. Real aviation knowledge sometimes exists in unexpected places, possessed by people whose current roles don't reflect their full capabilities. The most skilled aviators might be flying cargo instead of passengers, working as instructors instead of airline pilots, or serving passengers instead of commanding aircraft. When the F-22 pilots called her Valkyrie 9, they weren't just recognizing Elena's past military service. They were acknowledging someone who had chosen to use exceptional aviation skills in service of civilian passengers, rather than continuing in combat operations, where such expertise was more commonly valued and recognized. The story challenges us to look beyond job titles when evaluating aviation competence and dedication. The person serving your drinks might have experience that would humble experienced pilots. The quiet colleague who prepares extra equipment might be preventing disasters through knowledge gained in conditions most aviators never face. Real aviation expertise often wears service uniforms and works in passenger cabins, while real aviation heroes save lives by applying skills that transcend the boundaries between military and civilian flying. Elena found meaning not by abandoning her pilot skills, but by using them to create safe journeys for people who trusted her to bring them home. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, subscribe to LN Steel Heart Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people creating real stories, not mass-produced AI.